Welcome to Roadmaps and Roadblocks. I'm Beth Osborne, Director of Transportation for America.
And I'm Martha Roskowski with the Funders Network. So we created this series to provide bite-sized, maybe big bites, information and stories about the federal program that supports highways, transit, passenger rail, and active transportation, how it got to be the way it is, and how we can make it better. This series is for anyone who thinks we deserve a better, safer transportation system that gets people where they need to go. In this series, we hope to illustrate what's working, what isn't, and brainstorm about how we can change it.
So let's get to our special guest. Today, we're going to talk to Susan Handy. She is a distinguished professor at the University of California at Davis. She is a longtime leader in research on the relationships between transportation and land use and on strategies for reducing automobile independence. We invited Susan because she is one of the best thinkers in the country on how we measure our transportation system and prioritize projects. I'm super excited because I actually use this as an excuse to pull out her recent book, Shifting Gears Toward a New Way of Thinking About Transportation. It's just an incredible walk through how we think about transportation versus what the transportation program delivers and that mismatch. I recommend to everyone that if you haven't gotten her book, Shifting Gears, you go and get it now.
And I will mention that when I was working on the greenhouse gas performance standards in Colorado, when we were talking about how can we measure the performance of our transportation system, what impacts do new highways, highway widenings have on our transportation system, and just being frustrated about our lack of good measurements for this. The vocabulary, the metrics around how our system operates, all roads led to Susan Handy. Your name invariably came up in the research as one of the best thinkers in the space. So we're so happy to be here today. So Susan, tell us a little bit about your background, and then we're going to dive into our 4 questions with Susan Handy. Dr. Susan Handy.
Yes, thank you. And I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for that wonderful introduction. So yeah, I've been doing transportation research for more than 3 decades now, and came into the field with a background in both civil engineering and urban planning. So definitely approach all of this with an interdisciplinary perspective.
What in our current approach to building roadways, transit, rail, active transportation is working right now?
Well, I think the answer to that question depends on what objective you consider. So if the objective is to continue to expand the highway system, the program is working very well. If the objective is to improve safety, especially safety for bicycles and pedestrians, if the objective is to provide people with transportation options, good transportation options, if the objective is to serve the needs of low-income households or people with mobility limitations, then it's clear that the program is not working so well.
So it sounds like what you're saying is we are delivering one product well, highways, and nothing else well. Is that a fair encapsulation?
That's a fair interpretation. Yes. Yes.
So
yeah, we've been doing the highway building thing for a century now, and in a really big way for many, many decades. And really the other stuff is gets kind of marginal attention in this program.
You know, I have been thinking recently that we are at this point in time where our highway system, arguably, but is complete. Like, we built the interstate system, we built these highways, and yet our whole system, we don't know how to do anything else. So we just keep doing this. We just keep chunking down the list.
I do have to just point out that the Senate Congress, in fact, claimed that the system was complete 30 years ago. So boy, are you right, Martha. We just keep doing the same thing, even though we finished it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Susan, as a keen observer and researcher in this space, when we think about the federal approach to transportation, you know, our big reauthorization, our federal transportation bill, what's not working, from that perspective, from that lens, in terms of like measuring the performance of our transportation system and really setting the priorities for our transportation system?
Well, yeah, measurement is a big part of this in that we measure congestion very well. We have standardized ways of measuring it. We collect all the data we need to measure congestion. So even when we started talking about different kinds of objectives, starting back in the 1990s, we weren't necessarily measuring our performance relative to those other objectives. And even after all this time, we have not done a very good job of developing the data that we need and developing some consensus about what are the right metrics for those other objectives. And it's really hard to unseat that focus on congestion when that's what we're measuring and that's what we've got the data for.
One of the reasons people always say that we shouldn't is, well, two of the excuses is other things we might measure, we don't know how to, or it's too expensive. And yet you have not only provided a tool to help people measure some things like induced demand, but you're able to support it in a way that people could be plugging into at no cost to them. How do we break through this excuse? Does it deserve
It is, yeah, absolutely. It's an excuse. There are lots of good tools out there to measure lots of important things. And again, I think it's just inertia within the profession in terms of here's how we do things. And it's hard to get professional practice to change. Accessibility measures is a really great example of this. There's all kinds of great work going on how do we measure accessibility in a way that we can then focus on that as the objective of our transportation policy.
You're talking about measuring how many places people can access no matter how they travel. And I will hear DOTs say that no one knows how to do that, in spite of the fact that places like Virginia have been doing that for a decade. It occurs to me that an example of that is your induced demand calculator. I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, let's go. Let's talk induced demand. I would think you're the queen of induced demand and wear that crown proudly.
Yes, well, and then my colleague Jamie Volker gets a lot of credit for the work that we've been doing out of UC Davis. But yeah, we have tons of robust research by now that shows that when we expand highways, that induces additional driving for various reasons. The simple explanation is that you widen the highway and that's going to reduce the cost of travel, where cost includes time. And then what happens when prices go down, people consume more. So lots of robust research showing this and showing that the effect is about a one-to-one thing. So 1% increase in capacity leads to about a 1% increase in driving after a few years. So we created what's called the NCST calculator. NCST is the National Center for Sustainable Transportation that I direct. And it's being used in California to estimate what's the increase in vehicle miles of travel that a particular highway expansion project will generate. And this is really important under the California Environmental Quality Act and the requirements for what kind of environmental impact assessment has to be done. So it's been a very interesting few years as California is shifting from a focus on congestion to this focus on vehicle miles of travel, and of course the implications of vehicle miles of travel for greenhouse gas emissions. And I'm seeing firsthand the challenge of shifting practice from the very traditional ways to some new ways of doing things.
Tell us a story, a specific story that illustrates this.
Yeah, well, I think a good story is this expansion of Interstate 80 that's going on as we speak in Yolo County, which is where I live. We are just west of Sacramento, so this is a very important stretch of roadway for people heading east from the Bay Area to places like Lake Tahoe and beyond. There's an initial project underway that was sold as a safety project, having to do with improvements to the median. But as a part of the safety project, they've expanded the pavement. And that's really preparation for the second proposed project, which is to add additional lanes. Probably they will be high occupancy toll lanes of one sort or another. And of course, there's federal funding going into this. So that was a big push for this project was, hey, we got some federal funding. We need to spend it. So let's do this project. The additional lanes are being sold as a way to reduce congestion, which is true of most of these highway expansion projects, even though the analysis doesn't necessarily support that. What the analysis does show is that the project will generate additional vehicle miles of travel. And so even though California has explicit policy about reducing VMT, the project still is getting a lot of local support. And here's the kind of twisted logic of this. You know, a lot of the reason for the local support is that Caltrans will have to mitigate this increase in VMT as a part of the California Environmental Quality Act. And that means money for transit projects and bicycle and pedestrian projects that otherwise would not be getting funding. So the local support is partly about, this is the only way we can fund these other good things we want to do. So we're having to widen the freeway at the cost of hundreds of millions of dollars to get a little bit of money going into these other forms of transportation.
I mean, this is what happens at the federal level as well. You have to spend $4 on highways, of which at least one of those dollars will go to expanding highways if you're going to get $1 for transit. And somehow everyone goes for that as if that's a good deal.
It's crazy, right? Would you design
It is
this?
crazy.
Yeah.
It's a terrible negotiating tactic. It explains why we've gotten so little, and yet people think it's crazy to try to do anything different. But that is our fourth question. How do we do something different? How do we fix this?
We've been doing things the same way for a century. So how do we undo that? And what I talk about in my book, thank you for the plug, is that what we really need is a shift in some underlying, deeply embedded thinking in the profession. But as I've come to appreciate, not just within the profession, but for the public. And it starts with, you know, the very American idea that my car is my freedom, right? Well, it's not. In a lot of ways, it's not. You're stuck in traffic. You're paying a ton of money for your car. And then there's so many people who are left out of the car system that don't get the same kind of freedom of movement. But my latest obsession is the obsession with congestion. I think that this is a big part of the problem, is that there is an obsession with congestion. Of course, nobody likes congestion, but it's not the only problem that we face. And then this is related to the idea, or the belief, that expanding highways is going to solve the congestion problem, which it never has over a century of trying, but we
Just
can't
two
let
more
go of
lanes.
that idea.
Two more lanes is all it's going to take.
Yep.
This
And this project is going to be the unicorn.
that's
Yes,
it.
yes.
Yeah.
And that's how these projects are being sold to the public, you know, so the public buys in. They say, I don't like congestion. We need to widen the highway because that's what the policymakers are telling them. So there's a lot of, yes, deeply embedded ideas that need to be challenged and changed.
But I think that's right. If I were to pick the one thing to change in the program at the state or the federal level, it would be honesty in terms of what a proposed project will do for congestion, whether that means having to look back at past projections, show how flawed everybody's model is, how they promise things and their model is regularly wrong, but they never have to mention that part, or looking at measuring induced demand. Because when we looked at the past 30 years of performance of the surface transportation program, particularly highway program, we found of the largest population, the largest 100 cities in terms of population, all of them had an increase in congestion, including cities that had lost population and added lane miles. So we're good at building highways. We're not good at building a highway system that moves people well. We found a way to build highways that moves fewer people more slowly.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that specific, like measure induced demand, be honest about what highway projects are going to do, and shift to performance measures like accessibility. Can people actually get to where they want to go more easily, more quickly, more safely, and not just by car?
Yeah. So I like to talk about not reducing congestion, but providing alternatives to congestion. To me, that's how we solve it, right? It's futile to continue to focus on trying to reduce congestion. And we did that during the pandemic, right? We got rid of congestion.
Sure did.
We know how to do it.
And GHG,
Yeah.
our air got cleaner, emissions were reduced, like.
But if we can focus on accessibility instead, making it easier for people to get what they need in closer proximity, especially, yeah, then you don't really care about congestion, right? I mean, I can live my life pretty nicely within Davis by bicycle, and I don't worry about the congestion on I-80.
Right.
Which is a real privilege. I mean, most Americans don't have that sort of a privilege. So how do we create that for more people?
Absolutely.
Fabulous.
Well, is there anything we should be pointing people to other than your book and the induced demand calculator? Are there other things you're working on that you would like people to know about? We'll put it in.
Well, I will point everybody to the website for the National Center for Sustainable Transportation, where researchers at UC Davis and several partner schools have been doing really important work around how do we improve the sustainability of the transportation system.
Well, thank you so much for everything you do in this space. And I look forward to what you come out with next.
Thank you both for all your hard work.
Well, Martha, all I can think is I wish I had taken a class with someone like Dr. Handy when I was in college. You've got an academic with real research chops, but also has a talent for boiling things down to a simple explanation.
Makes me want to go back to school. Dr. Handy, you just do a remarkable job of taking fairly complex things and just helping people understand what it is and why it matters. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I think it's an important role for researchers. We've got to figure out how to do that.
Well, I'm going to finish up with a quick factoid based on exactly what Dr. Handy was talking about in a 2004 meta-analysis, which took in dozens of previously published studies. It found that on average, a 10% increase in lane miles induces an immediate 4% increase in vehicle miles traveled, and that climbs to 10%, the entire new capacity within just a few years. Talk about inefficient. We appreciate people tuning in, and the wheels of transportation keep rolling, and so do we.
Catch you next time.